Jonathan Reed was a man the world admired, but admiration had never been what he chased. He had built his fortune with discipline, sleepless nights, and sacrifices no one ever saw. His name appeared on business magazines, his face on conference banners, his signature on deals worth more than entire neighborhoods. Yet every evening, no matter how exhausted he was, he returned to the same place, the same room, the same woman. His mother. Margaret Reed had once been the strongest person he knew. She worked 2 jobs after his father died, never complained, never asked for help, and never let Jonathan feel poor even when they were. She stitched his school uniforms herself, skipped meals so he could eat, and whispered prayers over him every night until he fell asleep. Now she sat in a wheelchair near the window of the mansion he bought for her, her hands trembling slightly as she stared outside. A mild stroke had changed everything. Her body weakened, her balance disappeared, and her memory sometimes played tricks on her. But her heart remained gentle, and her eyes still carried the same love. Jonathan knelt beside her every morning before work. "Do you need anything, Mom?" he asked softly. Margaret always smiled. "Just don't work too hard." That smile hid too much. When Jonathan introduced his fiancée, Claire, everyone approved instantly. She was elegant, well-spoken, and beautiful in a way that cameras loved. She held charity events, posed beside sick children, and spoke about compassion as if she had invented it. In public, she treated Margaret like a queen, pushing her wheelchair gently, calling her mom, and kissing her cheek. People praised Jonathan for choosing such a kind woman. Only Jonathan noticed the small things. Margaret stopped talking as much. She flinched when Claire entered the room. She waited longer before asking for help. Sometimes Jonathan caught her wiping tears quickly, pretending nothing had happened. When he asked her what was wrong, she shook her head. "I'm fine," she said softly. "I'm just old." That answer haunted him. A mother who raised a son alone does not suddenly become weak in spirit. She becomes silent when she doesn't want to hurt him. Jonathan decided he needed the truth, even if it destroyed everything. He announced an urgent overseas trip, told everyone he would be unreachable, and asked Claire to take care of his mother while he was gone. Claire smiled and assured him lovingly that Margaret was in safe hands. Jonathan did not leave the country. He stayed in a private guest residence connected to the mansion's internal security system. He watched. He listened. He waited. The first day passed quietly. The second day shattered him. Margaret rang the bell for assistance, her fingers shaking as she waited. Claire entered the room with visible annoyance. "What is it now?" she said, not bothering to hide her frustration. "I think it's time for my medicine," Margaret whispered. Claire rolled her eyes. "You already had it." Margaret hesitated. "I may be mistaken." "You always are," Claire snapped. "You need to stop acting helpless." Margaret lowered her eyes, ashamed. Jonathan felt his chest tighten. Meals came late. Sometimes they didn't come at all. Water glasses were left empty. Claire pushed the wheelchair roughly, bumping into furniture, blaming Margaret for being in the way. When Margaret accidentally dropped a spoon, Claire exploded. "I didn't sign up to be a nurse," she shouted. "You ruin everything." Margaret cried silently, wiping her tears with trembling hands. Jonathan watched every second. He wanted to storm in. He wanted to scream. But he forced himself to wait. Then there was Elena. Elena was the night cleaner. She wore simple clothes, tied her hair back, and moved quietly through the mansion. No one noticed her. Claire never acknowledged her presence. But Elena noticed Margaret. She noticed the untouched food trays. The dry lips. The fear hiding behind polite smiles. She noticed how Margaret apologized for asking for water. One night, Elena stayed after her shift ended. She brought soup from home in a small container. She warmed it carefully and fed Margaret slowly, speaking gently, as if talking to her own mother. "You are not a burden," Elena whispered. "You are loved." Margaret broke down. No one had spoken to her like that in weeks. Elena cleaned her, changed her blanket, held her hand, and prayed quietly beside her bed. She stayed until Margaret fell asleep peacefully. Jonathan covered his mouth and cried for the first time in years. A few nights later, Margaret collapsed. Claire screamed, not in panic, but in anger. "Why does this always happen when I'm busy?" She did nothing. Elena did everything. She called emergency services. She lifted Margaret with all her strength. She refused to leave her side. She rode in the ambulance, holding Margaret's hand, whispering encouragement. Doctors later said Margaret would not have survived if help had been delayed any longer. Jonathan felt his legs give way. The next morning, he returned home. Claire rushed to him, fake tears ready. She complained about how difficult Margaret was, how exhausting everything had been. Jonathan said nothing. He turned on the screens. The house filled with silence as every moment played. Every insult. Every scream. Every tear. Every act of kindness Elena showed when no one was watching. Claire's face drained of color. Security escorted her out. Jonathan knelt beside Elena. "You saved my mother," he said, his voice breaking. "You saved my family." Margaret recovered slowly, surrounded by care, respect, and love. Elena was offered a new life, but more importantly, she was offered belonging. Jonathan learned a truth that money could never buy. Love is revealed when power is gone. Kindness shines brightest in silence. And sometimes the greatest angels are the ones the world refuses to see.